Something Salted and Twisted is the 10th episode of the third season of 2.5 Men. This is directed by Schiller, and for me this feels like an episode of two halves, or maybe 2/3 and then 1/3, because the first two-ish thirds are really great, and I found the final third to be tremendously boring. So there will be spoilers from now as I go through what happens, mention some personal highlights, and then I'll discuss the point where I stopped enjoying it. It's not really the case that it's bad in the final third. It's just not good, at least in my opinion. So it starts off in a restaurant, and we have a discussion between Alan and Charlie where Alan is insisting he's paying, and then he says, well, maybe Charlie can leave a tip. Well, maybe they can split the bill. And honestly, I didn't see this bit coming. I couldn't remember what happened next from when I last saw this episode. And Alan says, actually, I forgot my wallet. And as luck would have it, Charlie brought his wallet. He brought Alan's wallet for him. So I found that to be very entertaining. Meanwhile, the entire time, Jake has a spoon hanging from his nose. And we also get a bit of suspense, or a little bit of a mystery, because Alan mentions that they're there to celebrate good news. But we're not allowed to find out what that is until Evelyn arrives. Evelyn then arrives, and we find out that Alan is on the front of this newspaper where he's called a good doctor, good neighbour, good guy. And Charlie and Evelyn are not really bothered by this, and he just wants a bit of praise, and he gets really worked up about this. And this launches us into the main narrative. He gets very drunk because he's very upset that nobody's going to give him even just one little attaboy. And when he comes home, he is drunk, and he tries to talk to Jake about his mortality, and then kind of falls over while standing and says, "we," which was adorable. And quite sweetly, he told Jake that he was proud of any accomplishments that he will ever have. And he says, "I love you, and you have cheeks like a beaver," which I thought was very sweet. And he then vomits, and Charlie gives him the attaboy he wants. And Charlie mentions something that made me so happy. And he tells Alan, if you put the seat down on the toilet, it's easier to rest your arms while you're vomiting. And honestly, every time somebody throws up in a film, they have the toilet seat up, and it makes me feel sick. I am not touching that part of the toilet. Like when you've got the lid up and then the seat up and it's just the bare toilet, I'm not touching that. If I'm throwing up in the toilet, I'm not leaning on the toilet with the seat up. It makes me feel so sick to think about it. That's not why Charlie suggested putting the seat down, but it was just so refreshing to see that somebody has what I consider to be the right way of doing things, because that's a little bit less disgusting. Maybe I'm alone with that, but it always makes me feel sick and irritated whenever I see people doing that in films. I don't know if people do that in real life, because it's not the kind of place I tend to hang out in, bathrooms where people are throwing up, but it just really gets me. We'll move on from this, but I just wanted to praise that moment, because I felt, even if the reason was different, I felt a little bit of solidarity there with Charlie. Alan is doing what he's doing, and he realises that everything he has done, the way he carries himself, the way he dresses, the way he conducts things, is to get the approval of women. Different women, his wife, his mother, and he says that he is no longer going to grovel for any woman's approval. We then cut to the following morning, and Alan is at the breakfast table with Jake. Jake is eating cereal, maybe slightly more loudly than normal, but obviously to Alan, it's very loud, and he looks horrendous. It is so unusual to see Alan looking unkempt that it's really fascinating, and I found it to be rather entertaining. Initially, he doesn't remember what he was doing last night. He couldn't remember this realization he had about always wanting women's approval, and then he remembers, and he tells himself that he's the new Alan, and off screen we hear Berta laughing and then saying that she wet herself, which I just thought was absolutely brilliant. And the timing is perfect for Alan to put this to the test, because Judith has arrived to pick up Jake, and she knocks on the door. Alan and Charlie answer, and she asks him if Jake is ready, and Alan says no. And he says, if you don't like that, I don't give a rat's furry ass. And I honestly really thought for a moment he was going to stand his ground, but unfortunately he backtracked, apologised, and went to get Jake. So that was short-lived. Charlie and Alan then go to a bar, And from this point on, I found it to be tremendously boring. Charlie is trying to hit on a woman, but Alan wants to talk. That's the reason they were going to the bar in the first place. And Charlie basically tells him the reason that he can talk to women randomly is because of alcohol. And I don't really love the message there. I don't think it's a great message. And I don't like how it played out. I just found it to be tremendously dull. There wasn't anything about, from the moment we went into the bar until the end of the episode, there wasn't anything in that I found entertaining. There wasn't anything that I found funny, and I don't like the message either, so I didn't particularly find it to be insightful either. I do like the fact that we ended the episode with Alan throwing up again, so it kind of suggested, well, yes, in the previous scene, he did drink, and maybe that did help him loosen up a bit, but look at what he has to deal with afterwards, so maybe don't drink that much, otherwise you'll end up like Alan again. And I think that was a pretty sensible decision, but I still don't particularly love that scene. I just didn't find it entertaining at all. And sometimes the bar is an okay setting. I don't mind it, but I don't find scenes there to be as funny as some other scenes. Pretty much any other scene, to be fair. But I just didn't care for it. So up until that point, I thought it was going really well. Really strong episode. But after that, I just stopped caring for it. And it did feel like an episode of 2/3 and then about 1/3 at the end, because it just stopped being entertaining. So it's not perfect, but the bits leading up to that point were not too bad. Needless to say, Something Salted and Twisted is not ever going to be my favourite. I think there are some interesting foods for thought there. If you are in the same position as Alan and maybe everything you do has been for the approval of a mother or a wife or whatever, and that could be really beneficial to some people, but in general, I don't really care for it. Half of the episode, maybe 2/3, not too bad, but beyond that, Something Salted and Twisted is never going to be a favourite.